Released in 1993, Black Sunday is the second studio album by Cypress Hill. Formed in 1988 in Southgate, California, the group consists of rappers Sendog and Be Real and DJ Muggs. Their unique Latin-influenced hip-hop, along with their advocacy for cannabis use, has made them a cultural phenomenon. The core members of the group got together in the city of Southgate, with their name taken from a street in the neighborhood. After moving from New York, DJ Muggs began his musical journey by winning a DJ competition with some basic home hi-fi turntables. This victory rewarded him with some prize money, which he immediately put to good use by purchasing the gold standard for any DJ of the era, a pair of Technics SL-1200s. This then led to a meeting with the local rap group Devastating Vocal Excellence, better known as DVX. The group featured Sendog and Be Real, but he cut his teeth as a recording artist with another group called 7A3. It was at this point that Muggs first worked with Joe Nicolo, who would go on to play a big part in the Cypress Hill story, as his label Rough House Records would sign Cypress Hill a year later. This experience also gave Muggs an insight into the record-making process and unearthed a desire to not just be a DJ but a producer also. But for this, he needed some more equipment, Muggs remembers. "I had to ask my boys, what should I get? And they were like, you need to get the EMU SB1200. So I got it. Little did I know how limited it was for sound and sampling, but with those limitations, it just made you more creative and then figure out ways to bend the reality of the machine." The maximum sample rate of the SB1200 was only 26.04 kHz at 12-bit. This gave it a gritty sound, which many hip-hop producers, including Muggs, found a way to further accentuate. For example, he'd sample beats from 33 RPM albums at 45 RPM, then slow them down inside the sampler, making more use of the limited sample time, and all the while adding more character to the loops, particularly in the bass end, Muggs said. The thing with the SP is that you had to sample the record perfectly on time, because you couldn't go in little increments. You could only go in increments of 6 BPM, so you couldn't just move it from 101 to 102. You had to go from 100 to 106. You had to get it right when you sampled it. But when you had it on a 45 and slowed it down, it brought this ring and crunch to it that gave it a unique sound. You could put wham in there, it's going to be gritty. Also, being able to sample only small fragments of records forced Muggs to piece together sonic collages for the demos that he made with Be Real and Sendog as the newly named Cypress Hill. You take a lot of these little things and just make a collage, he says. It wasn't like taking big samples and just looping them. Getting the tempos of the tracks right involved some trial and error for Muggs. On Insane in the Brain, it was about 6 BPM slower. It didn't have its thing, so I sped it up 6 BPM. I think it was 96 to 102, and it gave it this cool bounce. The first records they made with Rough House went on to do amazingly well after the music was featured in some prominent films such as Juice and White Men Can't Jump. They managed to create a distinctive style and personality in their music that the audience of the day were latching onto. And it wasn't just for strictly hip-hop fans either. This inevitably gave them the confidence to start work on their next record, which would eventually go on to be their biggest success. With a relatively simple setup, and definitely by today's standards, Muggs was able to construct the entire arrangements at home before bringing them into the studio for Joe Nicolo to work on. Based in Philadelphia, Studio 4 was the heart of Rough House Records, and it was a very well-equipped facility that housed a Neve 8048 34-input console with 1081 EQ preamps in it. They also had a great collection of outboard compressors with LA2As, LA3As, and 1176s. Room B featured an E-Series SSL, which the album was mixed on. The first technical challenge Nicolo had when Muggs brought his tracks into the studio was to add an SMPTE code to the studio's 2-inch master, and then print the programmed tracks from the individual outputs of the SP1200, Nicolo said. If we wanted to go back and change something or add something, we had timecode to lock other things up. I sometimes felt songs might need a little extra black pepper, so we might add an 808 or stuff like that. We'd always be adding kick and snare samples. We used a Bell sampling delay. It was one of the earliest samplers that had a trigger mechanism, so that we could trigger any kick or snare sound, and we could change the pitch. A lot of the rhythm tracks on that record were just 2 or 3 tracks, with kicks and snares, so a lot of the pulling out of those tracks was really with the API graphic EQ, just to really dig in with a thickness to those loops, to try and give them some balls. Recording Be Real and Sendog's raps, Niccolo had 3 key mics he'd like to use, although he tended to rely on one in particular. We had 3 Neumann U87s, 2 silver and 1 black one, he says. The black 87 we called Black Elvis, especially for rap. For me, that was the go-to vocal mic. He continued, some of Sen's ad-libs from the home demos on the Tascam 4 track we definitely used in some of those backing tracks. Be Real had a nasally vocal delivery obviously, but we accentuated it by really peaking that vocal sound. If you listen just to those tracks, they're very mid-rangey, and that was the edge that cut across the top of those heavy bass tracks. I remember specifically using 1176 on Be Real's vocals in order to get as much out of the rhythms. Each song from the album was mixed in a single day, with the emphasis on trying to create a thick low end without it sounding too muddy. Drawing from his education at New York's Power Station studio, under the tutelage of Tony Bon Jovi, Joe used subtractive EQ to boost the low end as a result of taming the mids and the lower mids. It gave all that bottom end space because you were pulling out what we call the mush. That was the key to getting those records to have that low end they had without being overpowering. Mugg said, I'm really into bass. You drove cars in California, so LA hip hop was always about bass. There weren't a lot of effects used when mixing, mainly just some touches of reverb from the EMT 140 plate and the Yamaha Rev 7, with delay coming from the Lexicon Primetime 2. Remembering the complexities of mix recalls, Mugg said, you gotta think if we finished a mix and we took it down and wanted to fix one little hi-hat, it would take about 2 hours just to reset the mix. You didn't just go in the computer and turn it on and change the hi-hat. It was a mission. You really had to be dialed in, and there was no taking your time. Having said that, it wasn't all strict professionalism. Mugg said that they remember mixing some tracks from that album on mushrooms. I don't even know if we used them, because I think when we were done and stopped laughing and came down, the next day we looked at each other and went, what the hell is this? But I remember just tears rolling down our faces. Obviously we did too many stems, but those were the days. Muggs doesn't exactly remember all the samples used on the record, but George Semper's Get Out of My Life Woman does feature prominently on Insane in the Brain, and again throughout the record in various different mangled forms. It was just a bounce, man, Muggs said. There was something about it. It just had a certain sound and a certain feel to it that fit with the sound I created for us. You might as well have said that was our drummer, you know. There needs to be a musical identity. One sample that is widely assumed to be a horse neigh is believed to have been sampled from Mel and Tim's 1969 track, Good Guys Only Win in the Movies, but apparently it wasn't, as Muggs explains. That's weird. Everybody thinks that's a horse, but it isn't. I've seen that a bunch of times on these sample sites. That's the sound I made from a blues guitar that I pitched. At the time, I used to run some sounds through guitar amps. When I heard that horse thing, I was like, oh, that sounds just like it. Honestly to God, those sample sites get a lot wrong. When it was released, Black Sunday was more than just an album. It was a cultural phenomenon that resonated with a generation. It debuted at number 1 on the Billboard 200 chart and went on to sell over 4 million copies. The singles Insane in the Brain, I Ain't Going Out Like That, and When the Shit Goes Down were hits all over the world also, helping the album become one of the standout successes of 1993. More than 30 years on, the appeal of the record has endured, and so too has the band, who are still performing to this day.